The noise of the subway echoed through the streets of Nova Orleans, mixing with the distant sound of trumpets and saxophones that came from bars and street corners. In the midst of the hustle and bustle of the city, Jamal Carter, a young 26-year-old mechanic, was finishing his shift in a small workshop in the French Quarter. Working on cars paid the bills, but his true passion was always music. Since he was a child, he was fascinated by jazz, a love inherited from his grandfather, who used to play the double bass in the city's squares. However, life had not given him many opportunities. Raised by a single mother, Jamal had to leave school early to help around the house. The dream of playing professionally seemed increasingly distant. That night, after a long day of repairing engines, he stopped at a fancy bar, the Lafayette's, where big businessmen and rich tourists used to frequent. It wasn't a place he frequented, but a friend had insisted that it was just to relax and listen to good music. As soon as he entered, he realized that this environment was not made for someone like him. Waiters wore impeccable suits. Customers wore expensive clothes and looked around with superiority. Jamal sat at the counter, feeling the suspicious looks of some customers. That's when Theodore Harrington III, a millionaire businessman and heir to a luxury hotel chain, entered accompanied by some friends. The group laughed loudly, and Theodore seemed to have fun humiliating the bar staff, criticizing everything with sarcasm. When his gaze found Jamal, he narrowed his eyes. "Do you work here?" asked Theodore, without hiding his tone of contempt. Jamal took a deep breath. "No, I just came to have a drink." Theodore laughed. "Interesting. It's not common to see mechanics around here." Jamal remained calm. I was already used to this type of comment, but then Theodore pointed to the stage where a grand piano gleamed in the light. "They say anyone can play jazz in this city. Do you think you can do it?" His friends laughed. Jamal felt his blood boil, but he maintained control. "I can play a little, yes." "Then prove it." Theodore crossed his arms. "Play something. If it's good, I'll pay for your drink. If it's bad, you get out of here." The bar fell silent. Everyone was now looking at Jamal, waiting for his reaction. He looked at the piano. I hadn't played in public for years. His heart beat faster, but he knew he couldn't refuse. The silence in the bar became suffocating. The fixed gazes of Theodore and his friends were like sharp blades waiting to cut through any hesitation Jamal had. He felt cold sweat on his back, but he couldn't back down. Taking a deep breath, he slowly stood up and walked to the stage. His footsteps echoed in the elegant hall. The piano gleamed in the light of the golden chandelier, and for a moment the memory of his grandfather's old keyboard flooded his mind. He slid his fingers over the keys, feeling the familiar texture. It was an expensive instrument, different from what I was used to, but the essence was the same. Jamal closed his eyes and tried to ignore the low chuckles coming from Theodore's table. Before he could begin, a waiter discreetly approached. "If you don't play well, they'll kick you out," he whispered. Jamal nodded, feeling the pressure increase. But then he heard another voice. "Go ahead, boy. Play the way you know how." Era Charlie DuPont, an elderly man who played the saxophone on Bourbon Street every night. He was sitting at a table in the back, watching everything. Jamal had known Charlie since he was a child and knew that this old musician had seen it all. With a sigh, he placed his hands on the piano and began to play. The first notes were soft, hesitant, as if they were searching for space in the environment. Theodore smirked, convinced he was about to witness a disaster. But then Jamal closed his eyes and gave himself over to the music. Jazz began to flow from his hands, intense and charged with emotion. Each chord told a story. The difficult days in the workshop, the sleepless nights dreaming about music, the weight of never having had a real chance. The bar was completely silent. Even the waiters stopped the service to watch. What started as a test to ridicule him was turning into something completely different. The sound of the piano filled every corner of the room. Lafayette's, transforming the sophisticated bar into a true jazz club. What began hesitantly now flowed steadily, each note full of soul and experience. Jamal wasn't just playing, he was telling his story through music. The previously indifferent customers were now completely mesmerized. The clinking of glasses and the buzz of conversation ceased. Even the waiters stood still, taking in the melody. But the most shocking reaction came from Theodore Harrington III. The businessman, who had previously been laughing with his friends, was now motionless, holding the glass of whiskey without touching it. His eyes were fixed on Jamal, his expression wavering between surprise and discomfort. Jamal felt that. He knew he had managed to turn the situation around. And then he did something unexpected. Without interrupting the music, he raised his gaze and met Theodore's. The challenge was now his. Jamal's fingers slid across the keys in a quick, improvised sequence, a touch only experienced musicians could pull off. It was a direct musical provocation. And Theodore understood. The man, still not knowing how to react, leaned back in the chair. His friends didn't laugh anymore. The game had completely turned. When the last note echoed through the hall, there was a brief moment of silence. Then the first clap came from Charlie Dupont, the old saxophonist. Soon after, the waiters applauded, and in an instant, the entire bar was on its feet, cheering Jamal. It was more than just recognition. It was a victory. He stood up slowly, still feeling the vibration of the piano beneath his fingertips. The noise of the applause was deafening, but what really caught his attention was Theodore. The millionaire finally placed the glass of whiskey on the table, and with a half-smile, shook his head. "Damn it," he muttered almost to himself. Jamal knew he understood. Jamal walked off the stage, feeling the weight of the moment still in his chest. The bar was still buzzing with applause, but he just wanted to process everything. He, a mechanic with no formal musical training, had just silenced one of the most arrogant men in that place with just his art. The waiter who had warned him before was now smiling. I've never seen anyone make Theodore Harrington III swallow his pride like that. Jamal just shrugged, still processing the situation. But before he could return to his seat, Theodore stood up and walked towards him. The bar fell silent again, as if everyone was holding their breath. "So, Carter," said Theodore, crossing his arms, "where did you learn to play like that?" Jamal noticed that this time, there was no arrogance in the millionaire's voice, just curiosity. "My grandfather taught me when I was a child," he replied without showing much emotion. Theodore narrowed his eyes, as if pondering something. After a moment, he extended his hand. "You surprised me today?" Jamal hesitated. Was it a test or genuine recognition? But then he saw something in Theodore's eyes. Respect. He shook the millionaire's hand without saying anything. The bar erupted in more applause. When Theodore returned to his table, his group was still in shock. One of his friends murmured, "I've never seen you admit you were wrong." Theodore smirked, picked up his jacket, and left a generous tip on the table. Today was a day of exceptions, and he left the bar without saying anything else. Jamal stood still for a moment, taking it all in. Charlie Dupont, the old saxophonist, came over and patted him on the shoulder. "Kid, I think you just opened a door I didn't even know existed." And Jamal began to wonder, what if he really had? In the following days, what happened in the Lafayette spread throughout the city. The mechanic who humiliated a millionaire on the piano became a topic in several circles, from street musicians to businessmen in the French Quarter. Jamal expected nothing more than a good story to tell, but then something unexpected happened. He received an official invitation to play at a private event. The sender? Theodore Harrington III. The note was straightforward. Jamal, If you're interested in playing to an audience that truly values talent, come to the Hotel Beaumont on Saturday night. Theodore. Jamal stared at the invitation for a few minutes. Was it serious? He knew that Theodore was not a man to do favors. If he was extending this opportunity, it was because he saw something in him. And Jamal wasn't the type to shy away from challenges. On the night of the event, he wore his best shirt, which was still not as elegant as those worn by the guests at the luxury hotel. The Hall of Beaumont, it was even more sophisticated than Lafayette's bar, with sparkling chandeliers and well-dressed people chatting in polite tones. But as soon as Jamal walked in, the stares started. What was he doing there? He ignored it. He walked to the piano in the center of the room and sat down. This time, it wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation. He took a deep breath and started playing. Unlike the first time, there were no nerves, just music. The jazz flowed from his fingertips naturally, as if it had been made for that moment. When he finished, the entire room gave him a standing ovation. But more than that, Theodore smiled and nodded, as if he knew Jamal belonged there all along. Jamal realized that something had changed. Maybe your path wasn't just fixing cars. After the performance, Jamal was surrounded by guests praising his talent. People who wouldn't even notice him before now wanted to shake his hand, ask him about his history, find out where he used to play. But the most unexpected moment happened when Theodore approached again. I have never seen this hall as silent as it was while you were playing. Jamal crossed his arms, curious. And what does that mean? Theodore let out a short smile. It means you have something rare and that you're wasting your talent in that workshop. Jamal raised an eyebrow. Mechanics also do important work. Undoubtedly. But you were born for more than that. Then, Theodore handed over a card. This is my proposal. You choose whether to accept it. Jamal took the card and looked at it. He was the contact for a prestigious music conservatory sponsored by one of the Harrington family foundations. A scholarship? He asked, suspicious. Theodore nodded. The program helps talented musicians who have not had the opportunity to study formally. It's not charity. You enter on merit. Jamal was silent, staring at the card. For years, he had buried his dream of music, believing there was no room for him in this world. But now before him was a real chance. He looked at Theodore. Why are you doing this? Theodore thought for a moment before responding. Because for the first time, someone made me see what really matters. Jamal put the card in his pocket and shook the businessman's hand. Maybe, after all, tonight was just the beginning. 3 months later, Jamal found himself in a place he never imagined he would be. In front of an audience in a packed auditorium, in his first official performance, as a musician. The conservatory had been a challenge. For the first time, he was learning music theory, reading sheet music, and exploring advanced techniques. But more than that, he finally felt like he was where he was supposed to be. Backstage, he took a deep breath before entering the stage. Among the guests in the audience, he recognized familiar faces. Charlie DuPont, the old saxophonist, smiled proudly. Theodore Harrington III, sitting in the first row, watched in silence. The microphone was turned on and one of the conservatory directors took the floor. Tonight we have a special talent. Someone who reminded us that music doesn't just come from the notes, but from the soul of whoever plays it. Jamal swallowed. It was your turn. He approached the piano, the warm lights illuminating his hands on the keys. Then he rang. And this time, there was no challenge. There was no arrogance. There was no need to prove anything to anyone. There was just him, the music, and the certainty that this was the beginning of something much bigger.